is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Amen.
So like I just said in the children's message, I really don't know sheep that well. My one real-life experience with a sheep was when I was 4. I was at my great-aunt's farm in Nebraska, and I got to feed the newborn lambs with a bottle, and Bumper the lamb kept attacking me so he could steal the bottle out of my hand and have it all to himself, which I understand is not very typical of sheep. They're not supposed to be that aggressive. So I don't know a lot about sheep. And when I was in Phoenix, when I was in St. Louis, that was fine. They didn't know sheep either. You could just read a couple of things off of Wikipedia. Everyone nods their heads and goes, oh yes, that's how sheep act. I'm in Fallon now. You have sheep. You know people who have sheep. Any anecdotes I have, you're not going to gain new insights from those. So I thought I would try to find a better, at least more familiar to me, example for good shepherd son. So that picture up there is Ginnifert. He's very cute, very adorable. He's a jerk. Ginnifert, we've discovered a couple months ago, has epilepsy, which means he needs to be medicated every 12 hours for the rest of his life. Which means now, whenever I wake up, the first thing I get to do out of bed is to wrestle this cat to the ground and try to force medicine down his throat. My understanding is he's locked up in a room right now with nothing but a pill in his food in the hopes that he'll actually eat it, because I had to be here for Bible study and my wife can't get him to do it on her own. Because you see, none of the methods that are supposed to work for cats work on him. Most cats, you scruff their neck and they just instinctively freeze up and you can do whatever you need to. He doesn't. He flails around like crazy. He'll scratch you up if you scruff his neck. We tried wrapping him up in a towel, doing the burrito thing. He just sucks his head in there so he can't even get to his mouth. Or he's managed to start cutting holes in the towels with his claws. We've tried just putting the medicine in the food like my wife did this morning, but he doesn't eat it. He can smell it in there no matter how much you stir it up. So after, 3 months of this? Something like that. My arm and my back and my legs are covered in scratches and scars from wrestling this stupid cat every day. We had a couple of good days 2 weeks ago where we found we could put the pill inside of a little turkey meatball and he would just gobble it up so fast he didn't even notice the pill was in there. But now he's discovered there's a pill in there, so he just eats the meatball around and leaves the pill behind. And the worst part is, he knows he could just eat that pill and the meatball, ignorant as could be, as he had before, and then he wouldn't have to have the liquid medicine shot down his throat. But he still puts us through this every day. And it should only take 10 seconds. Just open the mouth, put the syringe in, squeeze the plunger, we're done. We're lucky if it only takes 15 minutes because of how much he fights us. He is a strong and stubborn cat. But despite all of this blood and sweat and tears, we continue to do this because he needs that medicine. He will very likely die without it. We know this. He might. I'm not sure. But the entire time we spend fighting with this cat twice a day, we just keep repeating the same mantra over and over again. We know you don't like this, but it's for your own good. We don't want to have to do this either, and we're only putting ourselves through this because we love you and we want to keep you around. And it's true, it is a huge hassle, and if he were not my cat, if I were just pet sitting for someone who's like, oh, you need to medicate this cat twice a day, I would say, no, I'm not doing that. Find someone else. You can't pay me enough to have to deal with your cat getting medicine. I even had a friend approach me on Facebook a couple of days ago because I post about the saga of Ginnifert on there, and she was asking how much longer I was going to keep doing this before I finally gave up and let nature take its course, because it's a hassle. That's the difference between ownership and just being the paid caretaker for something. He is a jerk. I just spent 10 minutes telling you that, but I love him. He's mine. And so no matter how much he fights me, I am willing to do quite a bit for his own good, whether he recognizes it or not, though I do wish he would stop being a jerk and cooperate. In his defense, he was fairly good yesterday, but we'll see how that plays out. So that's usually the message we get on Good Shepherd Sunday from John chapter 10. We belong to Jesus, and so he's willing to go that extra mile for us, even sacrificing himself when the hired hands just run away from danger, because he cares for us for the sake of us being his own, not merely a means to an end like those hired hands who just see the sheep as a paycheck. And that's a good and valid interpretation for the passage, and if that's all you take away from today's message, I'm fine with that. You can nap for the next 8 minutes or so. I'd rather you didn't, but you do you. But as always, there's more to be had if we dig a little bit deeper into this text, which is actually layered and multifaceted, and my favorite word, paradoxical. So let's look at that, and as always, we start by examining the context. We think of this passage as being something that would be in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, very nice, reassuring message for all of his followers. But actually, Jesus is talking to the jerks. If you read the chapter before, you see he's primarily addressing the hired hands of the Pharisees who are confronting Jesus because he healed a blind man on the Sabbath, and they thought that was breaking God's law. And so as much as we want to read this passage as pure gospel, there's actually a fair amount of indictment against those who have taken upon themselves the responsibility of the spiritual lives of the people and then treat them as something with which to line their own pocketbooks, abandoning them to be scattered by the wolves because they don't actually care about the sheep. And so Jesus is confronting the Pharisees with the ways they have mismanaged God's flock, which I imagine is not an enviable position to be in by any means. But still, the gospel does remain for these Pharisees, because even though they are the hired hands with the power and authority to defend these sheep if they would actually choose to exercise it, it turns out they too are paradoxically sheep. All people are, whether or not we realize it. We need to stick with the shepherd or we'll go astray, because we are dumb like sheep. And Jesus acknowledges that there are sheep who are not in this flock. We usually say that he's just talking about the Gentiles, but I think he's also talking about these Pharisees, and he's giving them this invitation that they, too, can be brought into the fold. Jesus' voice goes out as an invitation to all. Anyone who hears his words can become his sheep and be brought under his protection. Even those Pharisees who are going to conspire to have him executed, they are welcome into the flock if they would just listen to Jesus and flee towards him in the face of danger rather than their own arrogant pride. They just need to recognize that he is their shepherd and he is doing all of these things for their good, whether they realize it or not. And we see this even as he's on the cross. He still cries out for those lost sheep, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The Pharisees have an invitation here. The only one without a hope of redemption in this account is the wolf. So remember, those hired hands that run away that we always condemn, though they are also sheep in this scenario. Keep that into your head. And now we're going to address the odd way in which Jesus defends the sheep from that big bad wolf. Because if we think about a shepherd fighting for the good of his sheep, that makes sense. We hear defending the flock, and we think of David and how he got so good with that sling so that he could hurl rocks at predators and drive them away. We think about the 23rd Psalm where the rod and the staff comfort the sheep. The rod is a club that would be used to beat attackers away, and thus it becomes an assurance of protection for the sheep. And so this idea of a shepherd locked into a battle, fighting to the death for the sake of his sheep, sounds very heroic and admirable, but that's not what the text says. Jesus says he lays down his life for the sheep. And so in another paradox, the good shepherd himself becomes a sacrificial lamb, one who takes away the sin of the world. He becomes that perfect sheep offered up to the wolf so that the rest of the flock will remain unharmed. And that sounds really nice and poetic and beautiful, but it doesn't make sense. Dying as a first resort has to be ineffective, because even if it worked against this one wolf, how much longer are those sheep going to survive if they don't have a shepherd watching out for them? If they're left unattended, how long do they have before some other threat comes along to scatter them? Or they just wander off on their own accord and get lost or hurt? Not very long would be my guess. This tactic only works if the shepherd is so great that he can lay down his life to appease that wolf, but then rise up again to continue to care for his flock, which fortunately, as it turns out, Jesus can do. And so he does. And so because of his great love for his sheep, the Good Shepherd offers himself up as a sacrifice to appease the wolf so that it will not harm the flock, while at the same time he manages to continue guarding the flock and keeping it safe from all future threats, even while he's also seeking out those lost sheep who need to be brought into his care, leaving open that invitation for those hired hands who fled to return and find contentment as his sheep, trusting in him to protect them from danger while enjoying the privileges of being in his flock. And then something strange happens, and our paradox goes one level deeper. You can tell I really like this message because I love paradoxes. Just as those hired hands of the Good Shepherd are found to also be sheep, the sheep now become the hired hands, brought into the mission to help the Good Shepherd in caring for your fellow sheep, bringing in the lost from outside the flock. For just as Jesus tasked Peter after the resurrection during his reconciliation, "If you love me, feed and tend my sheep." So we are sent out to spread the word of the Good Shepherd so those who are outside the flock might also learn to trust his voice and come when he calls. As John told us in the epistle reading today, just as he was willing to lay down his life for us, so should we be willing to make sacrifices for our brothers and sisters, showing them love not only in word, but in deed and truth. And so now we are those new hired hands, although that doesn't quite fit the bill because we also have ownership over the flock. We recognize it is worth defending against the wolves of sin and Satan and temptation and death. So we are called to be under-shepherds for the Good Shepherd, hearing his voice and gaining his strength from his words of comfort, so we likewise can comfort and protect those around us, proclaiming his goodness to the lost sheep that we encounter throughout our lives' journeys, ready to make our personal sacrifices in order to care for those who need it. All the while carrying with us the same assurance that when we do lose courage and run like those hired hands, when we act as the sheep who have gone astray, when we forget that the Good Shepherd is the one who knows what's best for us, when we are those jerks who fight him against all of the things he's willing to do for our sake, the Good Shepherd still remains ever patient, ever faithful, ever merciful. His forgiveness extends to us time and time again, so we can always return to his watchful gaze as faithful sheep, finding contentment in his soothing voice as he leads us to green pastures and quiet waters until we are brought home to the safety of our pen, where there will never be any threat ever again, where we will hunger no more, neither shall we thirst, and the sun will not strike us nor any scorching heat, where the Lamb in the midst of his throne will be our shepherd, and God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. So find your comfort and your strength in the Good Shepherd as you go out into that dangerous world and help him to tend his sheep, all the while secure in the knowledge that he is with you always, guarding you through it all. And may the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus until the life everlasting. Amen. Please rise as you are able.